Yay. Great. So it's my pleasure to introduce the MindCORE speaker for today, who's coming to us from across campus. Desmond Patton is the Brian and Randy Schwartz University professor. He's a Penn Integrates Knowledge professor with appointments in the SB2, the School of Social Work, as well as the Annenberg School of Communication, and has secondary appointments in the School of Medicine and Psychiatry. He's well known for his work on social media and gun violence, how our actions in our online communities can affect our offline behavior. And through that line of work has also become an expert in detecting biases in artificial intelligence tools and thinking really critically about how to use these tools in the best way to improve lives and navigate between the hope and hype of AI. And so I'm really excited to hear what he has to tell us today about AI for gun violence prevention, opportunities and ethical challenges. And thanks for coming.
All right. Good afternoon. I really appreciate you all being here on a Friday afternoon and given all that's happening in the world. I just am grateful to be in community with you today. So today I want to share a bit about my journey as a social work scientist who hangs out a lot with computer scientists, and in particular, thinking about the utility of social media platforms and artificial intelligence tools like natural language processing and computer vision to better understand if and how they may be helpful in the gun violence prevention space or more harmful. And so I will take you on a journey as I have learned and made mistakes along the way. So I want to delve into what I believe the critical importance of crafting ethical artificial intelligence tools that truly center the community. And I believe this particular approach is more important than ever. I've learned along the way that ethical AI goes beyond technical considerations. I think it's about reflexivity and community and also leading with heart. So as a gun violence researcher, I advocate that we envision social media as a neighborhood, as a community. And I see social media platforms as vibrant spaces where people engage in diverse activities, ranging from idea exchanges and community building to initiating social movements. However, these same spaces also witness the darker side of trauma and violence and grief manifested through various mediums such as text, video, and live streams. So a pivotal aspect of my own journey has been to adopt a transdisciplinary approach by integrating diverse ideas and theories and methodologies. In my lab, we aim to comprehensively understand and share insights on the intersection of social media and gun violence prevention. So just a little bit more about who I am. I identify as a social worker. I got an MSW, Master's of Social Work at the University of Michigan, go Blue. I also trained in anthropology as an undergraduate student and also think of myself as a public interest technologist. But beyond these titles, my genuine connection to this particular subject really began on the streets of Chicago. So there I had the profound privilege of being able to immerse myself with young Black boys and men, learning firsthand about their daily navigation of violence, both in online and offline spaces. And so these particular connections combined with my academic pursuits have provided a unique lens through which I understand and view the crisis of gun violence in the United States. I do all this work through my research lab called the SAFELab. This is a lab that I started as an assistant professor when I was at the University of Michigan. We are a hodgepodge of folks: social workers, computer scientists, community members, psychiatrists, psychologists, and everything in between. And our mission really goes beyond traditional boundaries. As a research group, we're dedicated to the development of ethical AI tools, and we believe in building trust trustworthy partnerships with community members through co-creation and value alignment. And so we focus on the understanding of the lived realities of youth of color, exploring the interconnected worlds of violence, both on and offline. We leverage computational approaches through our collaborations, and we also conduct qualitative and natural language processing studies as well. And the hope is that this unique approach allows us to discern the nuanced mechanisms of violence in digital space and their impact in our lived realities. So in this complex world of social media and its role in amplifying gun violence, I think we're at a critical crossroads. This isn't just about user behavior on platforms, it's about the core of platform design and the influence of artificial intelligence and the guidelines that often shaped from a limited perspective. So I believe that this challenge, what we see unfolding on social media, requires a multifaceted approach. I think we have to embrace a transdisciplinary strategy that integrates the precision that AI could potentially bring, the empathy of helping professions, and the understanding of the human experience and behavior. So this approach, however, isn't just about combining fields, it's about harnessing the power of diverse and inclusive voices, each contributing its unique insights and strengths. So I think most of you know or understand that I believe in the United States, we are at a critical juncture. Gun violence is and has been a public health crisis, and recently acknowledged as such by the Surgeon General. This crisis isn't just limited to the cities that you hear about on your local TV station. We're seeing small cities like Pueblo, Colorado, and Amarillo, Texas, see staggering increases in gun violence, upwards of 119% and 117% surges, respectively. At the same time, young people are spending an unprecedented amount of time online, particularly on social media platforms. And they're not just there merely for online entertainment. They're connecting and planning, expressing themselves, and being influenced profoundly. And we also know that platforms like TikTok have become particularly well known and engaged by Black youth, reflecting a significant shift in how young people are engaging with digital platforms as well. From a practitioner perspective, I think these intersections of rising violence and a deep digital engagement present challenges and opportunities. So I think we have to consider how the digital age is shaping and influencing and potentially exacerbating the narrative of violence. And it's crucial for us to develop strategies that address these dual crises with a nuanced understanding of the social dynamics that are at play here. So behind me, you'll see headlines reflecting what I believe is an alarming reality in our digital age. The connection between social media and gun violence isn't just mere speculation. It is becoming an unsettling trend. I think these platforms that were once held for global connection are increasingly conduits for animosity and lethal confrontation. I think we must address the emerging risks of our digital advancements, and these headlines are just stark indicators of a profound challenge facing both our online and offline worlds. The digital age, I argue, reshapes how we interact and how violence manifests, requiring us to develop comprehensive strategies to mitigate these risks. And I think it's important to just underscore that our youth are just deeply embedded in these spaces that influence their behaviors and their perceptions. So we're at a pivotal moment. And I think we must bridge the gap between research and practice, implementing solutions that are grounded in the lived experiences and lived realities of our diverse communities. And I think this really highlights the urgency for ethical AI that could potentially help us understand root causes of violence as well. So in order to do this work effectively, in some instances, I think we must collectively make a shift around our understanding of social media. So oftentimes when I talk to folks, we think of social media and we relegate it to this virtual realm, as though it exists from our day-to-day experiences. But the distinction between virtual and real has become blurred beyond recognition. Social media is life. Every post, every comment, every like has repercussions in the physical world. The interactions that we might deem insignificant in the digital space can escalate, leading to tangible conflicts, misunderstandings, and tragically, violence. So firearm-related incidents that manifest from these digital conflicts are proof that what happens online doesn't just stay online. And so we must start to acknowledge the weight and the real consequences of our digital engagement. And I believe it starts with understanding the relationship between physical and digital neighborhoods, where they overlap and how they intersect and how they may differ. So drawing from insights gained over recent years, we have observed a convergence of intricate disputes and challenges within and between groups, often conveyed through concise digital posts and visuals that don't always capture the full narrative. Today, we find ourselves navigating what Jeffrey Lane from Rutgers University calls the digital street, or what Robin Stevens from the University of Southern California calls the digital neighborhood. And what Lane argues is that the digital street is more than just a virtual counterpart to the physical world. It's a transformative space that reshapes how individuals interact and live their daily lives, and it molds the identities, choices, and actions of young people in ways that can either expose them to potential harm or heighten their vulnerability to harm as well. All right, so I'm going to take you back. Come on a journey with me. I am a PhD student at the University of Chicago, and I am on Twitter and kind of following local Chicago folks. And I come into contact with two well-known rappers from the South Side of Chicago, Chief Keef and Little JoJo. And they're beefing. They're from rival gangs, Gangster Disciples and Black Disciples. Chief Keef has had this enormous rise in public discourse and media and music. And they're taunting each other. They're making fun of each other. They're making jokes. In the beginning, it's kind of lighthearted. And then over time, as other people begin to observe and interact with their conversations, it gets bigger and more challenging. Little JoJo is fed up with the beef. And he's like, yo, if you want to do something about this beef, meet me here. And on Twitter, he posts his exact location. And within 3 hours, he was murdered in the exact location that he posted on Twitter. And this is something that I'm watching unfold before my very eyes as a PhD student who was trying to finish a dissertation. And so I became worried and concerned about the interaction, and I wanted to know more about what's happening. Why are they using social media in this way? Do we know about this particular phenomenon? So like a good PhD student, I go to the literature and try to learn more about what I think might be happening. And there isn't any literature there. I couldn't find a single article to help me understand this new phenomena. And so what I did is I wanted to then look to see how we might engage in some theoretical work to perhaps define what I think is happening online. And so with my classmates from Chicago, we wrote what we believe is the first paper to define this new phenomenon that we called internet banging. And so this incident, really raised, what I watched on Twitter raised these critical questions about social media's role in the events of violent behavior. And so we wrote this paper to explore how young people, especially those who self-identify as being gang involved, how they use social media to provoke and incite conflict. And we examined the intersections, actions, and toxic masculinity and hip hop culture. And so internet banging highlights the unintended consequences of technology and underscores the importance of engaging both technically and with social sciences to understand how these complex dynamics unfold. So this work really, for me, as a new scholar, paved the way for a new research area focusing on the real world impact of this new phenomena. Okay, so we're moving along. I have now graduated from the University of Chicago, and I am now an assistant professor at the University of Michigan. And my goal when going to Michigan was to really understand this new phenomenon of internet banging. And so as a social work scientist and a qualitative person, I knew that I needed to spend more time hanging out with young people in Chicago. So I immediately wanted to develop a research plan that would allow me to go back to Chicago and to spend time as a qualitative researcher hanging out and listening to young Black and Brown men talk about their lives on social media and in their communities. But in order to do that effectively, I knew that I needed to have a partnership. No one was going to trust some random academic from a different state and have conversations with them. So in walks Eddie Bocanegra. Eddie has a really interesting story. Eddie spent around 14 years in prison for a crime that he admitted to committing. He then left prison, went straight to college, and also got a master's in social work from the University of Chicago. So I knew him. Our paths had crossed. He's also featured, if you ever get a chance to watch The Interrupters, which is a documentary about violence interruption work. He is one of the interrupters that was featured in their documentary from, I believe, 2012. And so we connected because he had then become the executive director of the violence prevention program at the YMCA in Chicago. So he had access and connection to lots of young Black and Brown men throughout the city. But before we could do anything, Eddie wanted to make sure that I had the right intentions. And so Eddie really became this kind of community level, street level IRB. He grilled me for 2 hours as I sat in a parking lot at a restaurant and asked me critical questions around what are my intentions with the young people that I want to interview? How will this work benefit them and not benefit me? Why do I care about what young people are doing in Chicago? How would I work with them and how would I share the knowledge that we have then learned together to benefit and support the community? And at the time, I was sweating bullets and really nervous about this particular set of exchanges. And now looking back, realized that this was an important step on my own ethical journey to thinking about folks outside of research and thinking about the lived realities of young people beyond what I need to get tenure or what I need to publish a paper. So this was a first step for me in my own unlocking ethical practices. And so I guess I passed the test, and Eddie and I began to forge now a lifelong set of exchanges and research projects to really understand this phenomenon at the street level. And so Eddie and I co-developed the internet banging study, which is our first study of this phenomena. It was sponsored by Michigan Research, and it was a qualitative study. And we spent a year hanging out with young Black boys and men, around 34 of them, and then also talking to folks who are identified as outreach workers. These are folks who are oftentimes from the community, maybe just as impacted, and are now working to use their street knowledge, their lived experience, their bodies, their mentorship, their capacity to interrupt violence as it's happening on the street level in communities. And so our overarching question was, what's the role, what role does social media play in gang violence? So one of the things that we learn is directly from those outreach workers that would then catapult a set of artificial intelligence studies thinking about how we can better support folks who are on the ground, but are missing the arguments that start on social media. So we gained invaluable insights from violence outreach workers who are on the front lines. And these dedicated individuals, even back then, had an innate understanding of the profound influence of social media, recognizing both its constructive and destructive capacities in relation to gun violence. Through qualitative interviews, we posed in-depth questions seeking to comprehend how the youth navigate social media and how these outreach workers harness these platforms to intervene in crises emerging in some of Chicago's most violent neighborhoods. So there's one thing that I heard from an outreach worker that really changed my life. So in an interview, one of the outreach workers said, so when somebody dies, it hasn't happened since leadership found out, but when guys would die, they would make a Facebook page, such and such Rott's page, instead of like Jose Garcia's page. And it was, for instance, Speedy Rott's, and then it would be pictures of him, and then, they would draw disrespectful symbols like penises around the mouth and bloodstains all over, and it would fuel more stuff. So it became clear to me that these outreach workers knew that social media wasn't just a tool for connection. It became a pivotal mechanism for managing community dynamics, particularly when confronting the specter of gang violence in urban neighborhoods. So these platforms, when harnessed correctly, could potentially offer a chance to relay crucial information that could potentially diffuse a volatile situation or even prevent an imminent violent event. So at the heart of this digital frontier are the violence outreach workers. Outreach workers serve as interpreters and a bridge, decoding the often complex digital language and using it to navigate and mitigate violent crises. All right, so I'm working with Eddie. We've done this qualitative study. Now this is around 2014, still at Michigan, still an assistant professor. And I am still connected to Chicago and I'm reading the Chicago Sun-Times. In walks who I think of as my patient zero. This is Jakira Barnes. Jakira Barnes was murdered on April 14th, 2014, and the article was about her life. And the tag was Chicago's gun-toting gang girl, Little Snoop. And they referred to Jakira as Little Snoop to compare her to the character from the HBO hit show of The Wire. Now, Little Snoop on The Wire was a tough cookie. She shot first, asked questions later. In this article, they describe Jakira in a lot of different ways. Some of the things I learned from the article was that by the time she was 1, her father had been shot and killed in a gang violence incident. When I talked to her mom about her life, her mom said that Jakira was going to her funeral every month from 13 to 17 years old. So this young person had experienced more death than probably most of us in this room will experience in a lifetime. In addition, when she was younger, her best friend, Taekwon Tyler, 13-year-old boy, was shot in front of her 9 times while they were enjoying a house party during the summer. And after that murder, Jakira told herself and her community that she was going to avenge his death. And so she engaged Twitter and created a Twitter handle called @TaekwonAssassin. So this became her new outlet for communicating to her community, but also just being a teenager, falling in love, listening to hip hop, enjoying the community, and also being very clear that she's a part of a gang. She's hanging out with the boys, she carries a gun, and she is ready if needed. Jakira also had this interesting mythology on Twitter. And by the time she was 17 years old, the word on the digital street is that she had shot or killed up to 20 people, but had never been arrested, right? So this mythology on Twitter is also following her. She's also quite active on Twitter. She's in the 95th percentile in terms of engagement in 2014. She had around 5,000 followers and around 27,000 tweets at that time. And so I am interested in understanding a couple of things. Will people retaliate based on Jakira's death because she's so active on Twitter? So she's murdered in April of 2014. I want to know, are we going to see individuals from her self-identified gang engage in aggressive communication online that may lead to additional violence in the streets of Chicago? And I want to know if potentially we could use tools like natural language processing to identify language that might be incendiary in some way. And so we started off with using Jakira's Twitter profile as a way of building a corpus, a language-based corpus. And we pull her tweets. This is at a time when it was easy to do these types of things on X or Twitter. And we also then look for individuals for which she had the most mentions and replies, and we pulled their tweets as well. And so we created this corpus of folks for which Jakira had a networked relationship. And within that network relationship, there were also individuals who were from opposing gangs or crews, but because of how things unfolded in terms of community dynamics, young people from opposing crews and cliques would follow each other in order to know what the next person is doing. And so that corpus included those individuals as well. But this is also a space where I'm making my first mistake as a scholar because the way in which I viewed Jakira was very much based on that article that basically looked at her as a bad actor, killer, murderer, horrible Black child. I'd also been trained at the University of Chicago to engage in a rigorous pursuit of problems and to analyze problems without a lot of holistic input in terms of how we look at this young Black girl. And so the reality is that I had imbibed lots of supremacist and toxic ideas around how we view and understand Black children in our society. And so it shaped the kind of questions that I asked. It shaped how I wanted to study Jakira. It shaped how we would then use artificial intelligence in this space. And so the reality is that because of that framing, it was easy to find lots of aggressive posts, lots of posts that could be damaging or problematic. Things like Vernon, that's the gun line, you cross it, you end up on the headlines. It's a really important tweet because Vernon is a street that intersects between two rival crews. But if you don't understand the context around Vernon and what that means within the local street economy, then you would miss that this is an invisible boundary. Anyone can get these hands in this life if you lacking. We see the ops, fuck them, we're gonna smoke them. These characterize the types of tweets that we could easily find in our data set. But what Jakira forced me to do in her death is that she forced me to reckon with her humanity. You see, there was more to her than just aggression and violence. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend. And over again, there were posts that really showed how this young Black girl lived her life. She also was very clear that she had experienced a ton of trauma and a ton of death. For one of them, the ops killed my broken heart. The tweet that has stood with me forever since I first encountered this article about Jakira is, "My struggle ain't been told." I think this is a reality for lots of young Black children in Chicago. And Jakira had this opportunity to narrate a complex and different story on Twitter, but it was incumbent upon me to think about how we can tell that story better. So this was a place where I had to double down on my social work training and what I learned about being a reflexive scholar to really think about the biases that we all have and how they are brought into how we interpret and make meaning of data in this space as well. And so there was another reality as well, another place where I made a mistake. Here, I had to confront the reality. I didn't know what the hell young people were saying online. I couldn't make sense of the language. I couldn't make sense of how they were using lyrics. Um, and I thought I was young back then, and I thought that I knew, but I didn't know. And so this is another opportunity where it became clear where my expertise ended and where the expertise of Jakira and folks in her community began. So we realized that we needed an approach, a methodology, a systematized way of acknowledging the bias that we all have and thinking about how we unlock that bias and use it as a tool to uncovering meaning in tweets. We created Chasm, the contextual analysis social media approach, to do just that. And so Chasm is our bridge. It connects the dots between the gaps in today's language tools and the diverse tapestry of culture and age and the geography that paint social media conversations. But it's more than just tech, it's about understanding community and the rich stories behind each post. And so we have Chasm as a way of checking how we are labeling and interpreting social media posts. But we need experts to help us do that well. In walks our domain experts. These are not research participants. These are young people who live in the same neighborhoods that Jakira grew up in. And they bring an understanding of language and culture and nuance as a way of helping us to translate what is happening in the social media tweets so that we have a better understanding of how we might annotate or label this data that will then be fed to an algorithmic system that can then automatically find these types of concepts around aggression and grief automatically. And so I went back to Eddie and said, "Hey, I have a new project and would love to find some young people that would be willing to participate. And they're not research participants. And he was on board. And so we hired these young people. A couple of things about this. This was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, harder than develop algorithmic systems, harder than getting research grants, because I needed to engage in a trustworthy process with these young people in a way that acknowledged where they were, they acknowledged their needs and how they wanted to engage with us as a research team. Many of these young people had lots of life that happened during our time together. One person had a mom that went to prison. One person had a mom that was killed. One person had to end up taking care of their younger siblings. And they were working with us in our lab, and they lived in Chicago. And at this time, I had moved from Michigan to Columbia University when I joined the faculty in 2015. And so this was a really hard process because we didn't work the same way. We didn't have the same goals. And we needed to figure out how to best operate in this space with these young people. And so one of the things that we did is that we created a mentoring support plan for them with folks who are from their organization in Chicago who could act as mentors and supports when life was lifing for them in this space. So that became a really critical part to how we would then engage in more reflexive experiences and translation of language as well. In addition, these individuals were also what I would call our community IRB. We would always submit for an IRB to conduct these studies. But at the time, and probably currently, IRB didn't know a lot about AI and didn't offer a lot of pushback, didn't offer a lot of substantive support for how we could do this work ethically. And so what we would do with these young people is that we would go back to their communities. I would fly back to Chicago and have meetings with folks at churches or community centers and present the plans for this work and hear their feedback around whether or not they wanted AI supported projects and tools in their community and how they wanted to collaborate with academics. And we would integrate their insights. And at sometimes we would have to not pursue a particular research question because it wasn't in line with how they saw AI working in their community. So this became a really important check for our collective work together. And so I want to kind of walk you through a short demo of how we do this work using Chasm and our annotators. So in this space, we paint the picture for you. We have now built a corpus of data based on Jakira and her community on Twitter. And we have built an annotation system that allows us to extract those tweets. And then we ask two sets of annotators. We have students who are studying social work at Columbia University, and then those domain experts. And we ask them to help us make meaning of tweets that we will then apply a label for in a binary classification that will then be sent off to our computer science colleagues at Columbia. And so in this particular demo, you have a social work student who was making meaning of the tweet, "I've been up for like 4 days straight." And so in this initial, we want to get a baseline interpretation of how they're looking at a tweet and how they're making meaning of it. And initially, they don't really have much to say. They just kind of respond by just repeating back what is already written here. They don't have a lot of context. What Chasm asks you to do is to look for context, to center context, to figure out things that you don't know. Go back to the social media posts, look up Hip Hop Wiki if it helps you to define or understand some language that you might be missing. Go back to the author, look at the timing of posts. Are people posting mostly at 2 a.m.? Look at the peer network. Is someone claiming to be gang involved, but only posting about the Kardashians? Looking at offline events and how offline events shape how people speak online. Looking at the virality of the post and how people are engaging with that post as well. So now that social work student who was annotating data has collected and engaged with a lot more context. And so that context allows them to provide a more thicker description. So now they say, this user is saying that he hasn't been up for 3 days straight, most likely meaning he hasn't slept in 3 days. This post comes days after his friend was killed. This user may be having a difficulty sleeping because of his friend's death. including a persevering emoji and a frustration emoji, with a thicker description that allows the annotator, the social work student, to make a more informed decision on the type of label that they will apply to the tweet. We identified 3 categories that we wanted to pursue based on the qualitative work that we had pursued earlier. The hardest thing about being a social work scientist hanging out with computer scientists is this need to put things in these neat little boxes. And so we ended up with a set with a binary classification looking for grief and aggression. Then all those other really important behaviors that I think we could probably all agree on were then collapsed as other. So these were the categories that would then be fed into a set of algorithmic systems. But remember those domain experts? Well, they're now back and they get the final say on how we're labeling the data. And this became really important because there would be some disagreements between our social work students and those domain experts. The reality is that the domain experts had proximity to language and community. They may have a backstory that they could unpack in a tweet. They may know the person involved in the tweet. They may understand clothing and how clothing and how people are using their bodies in a particular tweet, how that affects how people write as well. And so that would then shift the label. And so we would then always refer to the final label produced by the domain experts. They would get the final say. Again, but then we're taking all this qualitative work and context and annotation as a way of understanding language and culture, but also as an ethical check in our space as well. And then we feed all this to my colleagues. I worked closely with Shifu Chang, who was the Dean of Engineering at Columbia, and Kathy McEwen, who's a story computer scientist who was doing important work around text summarization as well. And so we collectively worked together on a set of small experiments to see, is AI helpful in being able to find these concepts, or is it a problem? And so the objective of our set of experiments was to predict labels, aggression, loss, and other for unseen tweets. We started off small, and then we would then add more context and more data for a larger unlabeled data set. And then we wanted to then add more context along the way. So I'm going to take you on this journey. Our first experiment was more of a thick data approach. We only had a small amount of tweets. And so we built a tool that could understand the unique ways that, that the local community speaks on Twitter. And we made a guide that translates their vocabulary into standard English. We then use a special dictionary or DL that helps to determine the emotions behind the words. And with the help of our domain experts, we could then understand the emotions in the tweets, even if they used African-American language. So after training, our system then could identify tweets about loss with 62% accuracy and those about aggression with 63% accuracy. So the reality is that our accuracy was pretty low. And we had to do this additional kind of language-based work because initially the AI tools, the gold standard AI tools, failed. They consistently misfired and misunderstood African-American language and the different ways in which young people speak online. One of the most complicated and weird conversations that I had to have with my colleagues was around the use of the N-word, because the N-word would consistently be identified as an aggressive term using the gold standard AI tools. So I had to have this conversation with my colleagues that that's not necessarily true within the Black community. And so the reality is that we needed to then see, okay, well, if we add more context and more data, can we improve accuracy in AI's ability to find these labeled concepts? So we then gathered more data, which was 6 times bigger than before, and we developed specialized tools to better understand it and enhance our approach by looking at both the finer details and the broader picture of communication. And we also use neural net approaches to then have more access to data, looking at trends in punctuation or words as well. And this all helped us to get even closer to truly understanding the messages and emotions behind each post as well. And so when we added more context and more data, our accuracy improved to almost 70%. And then lastly, we also looked at around 2,000 messages that contain both text and pictures, so in-walks computer vision approaches. We wanted to understand how often these messages showed signs of aggression and sadness or substance. So we tried different ways to sort these messages, either by looking at just words, just a picture of both. And so our results were that the words in a message are more important when identifying sadness, while the pictures are better for spotting aggression or substance use. So these are the types of images that we would find in our data set. These are not from Jakira's data set, but these are the types of things that we could then find. So you might be in the audience thinking, God, this feels like Big Brother, this feels like surveillance, and these are the things that I think a lot about and have a lot of concerns about as well. And I think one of the things that I do as a social worker is to think about how do we humanize this experience? How do we acknowledge our biases, and how do we use that as a tool to doing better work? So I believe that social work can be a supportive framework for how we think about the deployment and use of AI in these vulnerable spaces. And so in my work, I posit that social work thinking can be an apparatus of social change within the context of how we use AI and how we design AI tools. So social work thinking leverages the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics. Ideas like honoring the dignity and worth of every person, centering the importance of human relationships, and engaging in trustworthy practices, I believe anchor how social work thinking can be applied and how we do this work more ethically. The reality is that I think this work sits within a continuum of both benefits and limitations. So here's the thing. When I talk to Jakira's mom and folks like Jakira's mom, these whole high level academic conversations around ethics and AI really aren't that important. Because Jakira's mom just wanted Jakira to come home. Jakira's community just wanted Jakira to come home. And so any tool that could have helped us understand Jakira's life on Twitter and what she was going through and her stress and her grief from Jakira's mom's perspective would have been welcomed. Now, conversely, the social work scientist and someone who hangs out in kind of the social technical spaces, I understand that this is also could be a form of digital surveillance and policing, which I believe could enact and enhance other forms of state violence against Black and Brown communities as well. And so we have to sit with these two truths and toggle between them as we work through these issues. So I think there are some opportunities and challenges that I want to underscore. One is I think CHASM should be accompanied by a robust set of ethical guidelines that we should be considering. So you should, I think, initially, before you think about whether the AI is the right tool, you should also be writing up an ethical framework or plan for how you might use it and what concerns and non-negotiables you may have as well. I think one, we need to also understand the consequences of applying algorithmic tools to complex social problems. Do you need AI? Is AI the solution? Measurement of success of NLP outputs. What does it mean to have an AI tool that is accurate at interpreting and understanding African American language? If we got to 100%, would this help us in healthcare? Would this help us prevent violence? Or would it be used as additional surveillance and other ways in which we are oppressing diverse communities? And then I think also considering the extraction of content when using NLP and how natural language processing systems are derived, analyzed, and validated should always be top concerns for how we develop ethical approaches in this space as well. So I think thinking about the ethical concerns and thinking about Jakira and what she has taught me has moved me in different directions. And so my work has moved from thinking that AI is good for violence prevention. I don't think that. I think that we can use AI as a way for asking better questions. I think that we can use AI as a way of understanding root causes of violence. I think it can help us think about new ways of framing the problem as well. And so here, I think a lot about how we balance technology with humans in the loop for critical decision making. I think about the importance of the need to be transparent and have accountable algorithms in this space. And always remembering and thinking about who is at the table with helping us do research studies and analyzing data as well. And so with that, I began to think about the things that I did not see or I was not open to initially. And one of the new directions that my work has moved into is to think about joy and how joy could be an intervention for violence prevention, how joy was not initially a part of that initial problem defining or agenda setting, because I didn't think about joy as an opportunity. I missed it because of my own imbibing of toxic ways of looking at my community. And so that has shifted and changed. So now we are pursuing joy with young Black folks in New York City and Philadelphia. We have created a platform that has been funded by Microsoft called JoyNet. And so this particular process is one in which we created small communities of young people in New York City and Philadelphia and just have conversations with them about joy, about how they define joy and what joy means to them. And then we use those definitions and those understandings to empower a machine learning algorithm that can then find those concepts on TikTok. And then we move those concepts into JoyNet. And we are inviting young people to spend time on JoyNet to hang out in the space to see if folks, A, do they want to even be on a platform that's about joy? And B, can it be helpful as a redirect when young people are experiencing complex trauma, pain, aggression, and violence? And so we have created a prototype of JoyNet in the spring with my colleague from psychiatry. We're going to be testing it in communities in West Philadelphia. So I just want to end with a few takeaways I think are really important about this work. I think it's always important to have critical and diverse perspectives when we think about how we design algorithmic studies. I think we should consider social media as a community like we consider our physical world. I think AI can be a powerful tool for understanding and preventing root causes of violence. However, I think the social media and AI are not the sole answers to violence prevention. I don't think they should be used alone. And because I think when not used thoughtfully and correctly, social media and AI tools can be surveillance and used for mass incarceration or e-incarceration. Here we go. Thank you so much. Questions? Yes.
Thank you. That was an amazing talk. I'm going to take us back from joy. That's
Yes.
I was kind of curious. You kind of hinted at this in one of the most recent slides about the algorithms themselves within the social media platforms.
Yeah.
And I was just curious. Obviously, things have changed since Elon Musk took over, but I was just curious about some of the posts that you would be analyzing and whether they would kind of get more prominence through the boosting algorithms within X or within, I don't know, these other social media platforms that kind of might make things worse in some ways because of the inbuilt algorithm.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't fully know. I mean, what we now know is that many social media platforms were optimizing for harm, for trauma, to get people to keep coming back to platforms. And so given the ways in which these tweets were situated in communities with high rates of gun violence, and where a lot of the conversation would be about that violence, would be about those community relationships, then a lot of the tweets would go viral. A lot of those tweets would have a lot of prominence within those social networks. But a major challenge at both the platform level and the community level was a lack of true interpretation, a lack of meaning making. And so there wasn't a person or a group that could accurately understand what was being said or even get close to it. And so those viral posts that might be on the face deemed as violent or aggressive, there would be no process to understand or filter that in a way that's helpful for preventing future violence. Yeah.
What's kind of like the standard of care in like social work about like monitoring social media or like intervening through social media, et cetera?
Love that question. Yeah, so we just do group work. We have a group process where first our annotators go through 2 weeks of training around how to care for themselves and how to think about their time on social media. So thinking about how much time you're spending online, when have you had too much exposure, What do you do if you come across something that you think is really challenging or problematic, which didn't really happen because this is all historical data. We also asked every annotator to create their own self-care plan. So I can't tell you when you've had enough, but you know when you've had enough. And so we would implement those plans. And folks would do that often if they needed to take time away, if they needed to limit how much they were looking. We also didn't want people to spend like 8 hours looking at social media posts as well.
But that's all interesting. So that's about sort of like the care plan for the annotators. What I meant was for like practicing social workers, you know, are they going on social media to monitor or intervene or anything like that?
Yeah. No. And I think one of the things I've been preaching is that I want more social workers involved in of understanding social media and its utility for our practice. This is not a space that we have a lot of work in. This is not a space where people are doing a lot of research in. And I think that is problematic because it's not just young people living online. Many of the communities that social workers are supporting are spending an enormous amount of time online, and we're not there. So my hope is with this work is not just to talk about violence prevention and algorithmic systems, but also helping to encourage more social work involvement in tech, because I think our insights, our connections are needed, but also that's where our communities are. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just sort of curious. I'd like you to say a little bit more about what you seems to distinguish between like a surveilling kind of use versus the more ethical kind of use. Where do you see that?
Yeah, I think it's an ever changing thing for me. And so I can tell you where I started and where I am now. I started with thinking this could be a tool of identifying bad actors, that I could use this tool to identify the next potential violent event that happens in a community. And I think that's wrong now. I think that there's a lot of issues with that. Now I think it has allowed me to see things, to understand emotions in ways that can then trigger offline behavior in ways that I didn't understand by conducting qualitative work or survey-based work. One of the things that I learned by applying AI tools was like the trend in communication and language. So I have a paper in the Nature Partner Journal of Digital Medicine where we find this relationship between grief and aggression. And we saw that grief will oftentimes precede aggressive posts. And what that told me is that a lot of young people are using social media to cope, to process, to connect in ways that they're perhaps unable to connect in the real world. And that aggressive posts will come 2 days later because folks from rival groups or crews would then comment or disrespect, like you heard from the outreach worker. And so there was a 2-day window. So there was a shift in language. And for me, as a social worker, well, that's an opportunity. And how might we then be able to bring in a grief counselor or connect people and support them with the resources that they need to cope with that? And maybe at times, social media isn't the place. So helping people to engage in more of a reflective exercise to think about, well, when is it good for me to post on social media about how I'm feeling and my emotions? And when do I actually need to speak to someone who has some expertise in this space? And so I think for me, I would rather be on the end where we are helping people who need resources and support based on some of the emotions that they're posting about online as well. And one of the ways in which we kind of have moved into that direction is that with my computer science colleagues, we've created this platform called IESO, Integrating Emotional Stories Online, where we're having young people and other adults post about their emotions, and they could write in a more descriptive, qualitative way about their emotions. Maybe also have a set of emojis, smiley face, sad face, whatever, that they can then self-identify with as well to get a better and more accurate read of how they are showing up in digital spaces. And so that's been really helpful to have that additional data point around the emotionality that comes with grief and pain and trauma as well. Here?
Thanks. This was an awesome talk, and I really loved your tip from kind of the theme to the joy. It's really and research. But my question was, do you feel like some of this software could have some alternative uses in support like culturally competent caretakers and I'm healthcare? obviously not all providers in Chicago or Philadelphia are actually from this.
Yeah. Yes, let me see if I don't know if I left it here. Let's see. That's IESO. I didn't put it here. But yes, we have created a platform called Interpret Me. And so we partnered with the MIT Teaching Systems Lab to create a tool to help people think about how they might use social media in a way that, number one, exposes their own biases, helps bring in more context, and helps them think about differential uses of social media for care. And so essentially, and so we they had created a DEI tool for teachers, and so we basically adapted their DEI tool. You would then get presented with a social media post, and you can put in whatever data you want to, and then you're asked to interpret that post. And then you engage in a set of learning modules with paid actors that are representing an identity, a teacher, a coach, someone from the community that helps you think about context around that post. Because they may be able to tell you something about that young person or their group that you have missed. And then you go through those sets of modules, and then you have an opportunity to then rethink what you wrote before. And so we're able to capture data from how you then type and also how you talk about what you're seeing and experiencing as well. And our goal is to give you immediate feedback on how you might think about how you can use these sets of social media posts, how you might use your newfound awareness in a more ethical and supportive way. Yep. So happy to share. We are testing that tool right now as well, so happy to share more about that. Yeah, so this is still brand new, so I don't have a lot more context to add. So this was something, so I think it's important to know that this was a sponsored project by Microsoft, and said they were interested in being able to help people create tools that kind of intervene in the negative use cases of social media currently. The biggest challenge in this work was around the definitions of joy. I think one was making sure that we're not using Westernized understandings and approaches of joy. Everyone doesn't use the concept of joy in the same way. We also had really complicated conversations of what Black joy meant and how we understand it. And so my computer science colleagues who are white would struggle with like, okay, because someone has labeled us as Black joy, then that's the only conception of joy that we don't understand. It's like, well, Black people like all the things that everyone else likes, so it doesn't need to be labeled as Black joy. Let's just understand joy writ large. So my point is that this work requires a set of processes that I think need to be rigorous for unfolding kind of directionality of how we use these tools. And so without those processes in place, it's easy to create something that is not going to be useful or helpful as well. So right now we are just fine tuning the app, and we are partnering with various clinics and organizations in West Philly to find young people that are already thinking about grief and redirection of their grief in ways that are helpful for them. And we're gonna put JoyNet in front of them for about a month, and we'll see how they use it, their uptick around it. They will also give them an app that will allow us to collect mood data and sleep data and emotion data as well. And then, we will evaluate, and then hopefully then be able to apply for an R1 to test these ideas.
How do you think social media has a stronger impact on gun violence? Is it through the increased self-organization and connectivity between humans, or is it through algorithmic mediation?
It's a great question. I think both. I think people just live online, And I think that living online and being able to express your lived realities, social media allows for a space to have those conversations. I think the reality is that, the types of things that we see on social media were already happening before social media. Social media amplifies it and you see it faster and allows it to grow faster. And so I think the ways in which algorithm systems can work by people feeding into looking at violent fights online or being able to look at a violent lie, for instance, then it increases one's susceptibility to seeing that type of content over and over again. So I think both things are at play.
Curious if, it seems likely that this would be so, but if the other half of the big gun violence problem is suicidality, if
Yep.
that also shows up in the language online, or it does?
Absolutely. We have yet to study suicidality in this space. However, there have been, I mean, the thing is, we've only looked at this historically, so we've never been in a situation where we've needed to like react in real time. But I've seen language and content that has worried me and may be indicators for suicide, but we haven't had the opportunity to explore those relationships yet.
I think in one of your early slides, you had statistics on how many young people today are on TikTok versus Twitter. How so many more are using TikTok, and I wonder if you've done any work, trying to develop these tools with videos. It would seem like there's a lot more information in video on the one hand.
Yeah.
There's also a lot more information to misinterpret in
Yeah,
video.
yeah.
And so, like, could you do better?
Yeah, I would love to do that. And it's so hard to get that data. It's so hard to be able to work in that space. I mean, one way in which we've done this is qualitatively where we have folks come into the lab and to show us video that they deem to be connected to violence or aggression or grief, and then have them unpack that video for us so we can capture data that way. In order to do this at TikTok, I would need to get like an internal sponsor from TikTok and get them to approve of a study like this, which has now become extremely competitive to do, to be able to get that kind of video content to do the kind of study that I think is also really important as well. Yeah.
I wondered if you find the algorithm is